Hi, Charles. Do you expect a depression because of the lockdown situation? If so, what can we expect from the blockchain industry? Are they ready to offer a viable alternative to the failing fiat system? I do anticipate that there's a very high probability of a depression as a direct consequence of these lockdowns. This is a classic case of where something was done as a knee-jerk reaction in the short term because we did not have complete information and we decided to err on the side of caution that has been taken heavily politicized and the goalposts have been moved. In my own country, the whole reason for the shutdown was so that the medical system could catch up. We could get our PPE supply chains in order. We'd have a little bit of time to try to get better therapeutics, and that we could orient ourselves properly so that when we reopened, we could properly social distance and wear masks and these types of things. Those were the goalposts. That's where we started, and it was a reasonable, 1 or 2 month endeavor, understanding that it had profound economic consequences. Literally, it would wipe out hundreds of thousands of small businesses and probably double or triple the unemployment rate for at least a year. But it was a risk we took because we didn't know enough. Now, moving forward, the goalposts have been changed in the case of Los Angeles to we may not open up until we have a cure. We don't have a cure for HIV. We don't have a cure for the common cold. We don't have a cure for any of the other coronaviruses. We don't have a cure for influenza, but apparently that's now the goalpost. And they've said there's at least 3 more months of lockdown. The longer we do this, it infects society with a second virus. We'll call it the quarantine virus. And it has very real consequences on every single person. First, it destroys your constitutional rights and freedoms. Your right to assembly, your freedom of religion, your right of expression, your right to commerce. Second, it's instituting a spy state. It's apparently already okay for Google and Apple to begin tracking and tracing people on their phones and reporting that information to the government. It also allows the government to decide which businesses are essential and not essential. Apparently, in the state of Colorado, if you're a marijuana dispensary or you sell pornography, you're essential. If you're a church, you're not. So how you can figure that one out, I can't, but all right. And then it also leads to profound death. The case of suicides increased by about 1% for every percent increase in unemployment. That's a well-known statistic. And our unemployment rate has gone from about 4 or 5% to almost 20% in some places. 15% increase in suicide rate translates to at least 15,000 additional deaths, perhaps more, just in the United States. It destroys quality of life as well because those suicides are overwhelmingly represented by people under the age of 40, who many of which have small children and have many people deeply reliant on them. So all of those families have devastation that takes, in some cases, decades, if not ever, to recover from. Then you talk about all the people who can't get elective procedures. 34 have already died in Toronto. That's one place they've tracked it. Extrapolating across the entire United States, it's hundreds, if not thousands, of people who will die as a consequence of elective becoming much more so. This recent statistic I read said over 80,000 cancers will go undiagnosed as a consequence of this quarantine. It's important to also point out that the quarantines are bankrupting our healthcare system because no one's allowed to perform non-elective, no one's allowed to perform elective procedures. Doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners are being laid off en masse. Hospitals are going out of business. A time of a global pandemic where you would expect people to be working overtime, the healthcare system is being crushed. In addition to that, many people in the United Nations and World Food Program and other places that track famine believe that because of the economic devastation of the quarantine virus shutting down the world, 265 million people will be pushed into acute hunger, of which 1 to 2% will at least die of hunger, starve to death. The men go first, usually, then the women, then the children, because no one's there to take care of them. That translates to 2.6 million to 5 million people will die of starvation within the next 12 months because of the economic depression that has been pushed upon the world. To show the colossal mismanagement of government agencies in the United States, we are destroying food. We are allowing millions of sheep, chickens, pigs and other things to just basically be butchered and no meat processed, so they just rot. Silos full of agricultural goods are rotting as well. So the markets aren't functioning normally because of this. And despite that, millions of people will now starve to death as a direct consequence. Don't believe me? Read the New York Times if you're on that political persuasion. So no, these people who want to end these lockdowns don't want to get a haircut. They don't want to just go get a beer. They understand the profound social trauma, economic trauma, and death the quarantine virus will cause. Meanwhile, on the science side, we've discovered with all available data and the antibody tests across many places, a meta-analysis of them, that the case fatality rate's probably about somewhere around 0.34%. And that's probably going to be lower once we actually start accounting for a lot of things and dragging more data in as of next year. And that is overwhelmingly represented amongst people who have many comorbidities, overwhelmingly represented amongst people who are morbidly obese or old. Now, for a long time, medicine has been able to deal with people who are very vulnerable to diseases. There's at least one person who's had a cancer and had to have their immune system destroyed, bone marrow transplant, who said, boy, if somebody coughs on me, I'm going to have a really bad time. They self-isolate. We don't shut all of society down to protect them. We tell them that the burden is on their shoulders because we understand the socioeconomic realities of shutting all society down. Despite that, apparently people who claim that they follow science are saying that we're going to have quarantines and shutdowns where you're allowed to go on wet sand, but not dry sand. You can't go outside. You have to stay inside. 2/3 of people in New York who have caught coronavirus caught it during the quarantine indoors. You don't really see, you're not really going to catch this in a park with sunlight far away from people, but you can go ahead and kick Tom Brady out of a park. He's not allowed to exercise by himself alone in a park. It's insanity. It's absolute insanity. And the quarantine virus will kill far, 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 far more people than any coronavirus ever will. Furthermore, we will never get rid of coronavirus now, ever. It is mutated. It is in the wild. Too many people have gotten it. Just like the common flu and influenza, there will be new strains every year, and we, for the rest of time until medicine evolves much, much beyond where it's at, we'll have a double flu season, a corona season and an influenza season. Just there. Even if we develop a vaccine and we start distributing that vaccine, there's over 30 strains of coronavirus floating around. Flattening the curve will do absolutely nothing to mitigate death. It prevents people from dying as a consequence of lack of medical care. So the whole point was to avoid hospitals from getting overrun and a doctor in the ICU having to make the worst decision of their life of which patient do I give the ventilator to, accepting that the other one's going to die. We are under capacity to the point that we are laying physicians off. So that decision doesn't have to be made. The curve will be dragged out longer, but the same amount of people will probably get coronavirus with these quarantine, stay-at-home policies than if we didn't have them. And before anybody quotes the countries and places that didn't quarantine, for example, Sweden, and say, oh, look how terrible it is. They have far more cases than their nearest neighbor. I'll remind you that if you extrapolate Sweden's population to Italy's population, there's 10 million people in Sweden, 60 million people in Italy. There's still about 10,000 people less who would have died in Sweden than Italy. But then you say, oh, well, that doesn't count because Italy's a totally different country. Compare them to Norway, which is a totally different country from Sweden. And if you look at Sweden and you discount the retirement homes and the nursing homes, the places where people are most vulnerable, where they did have bad policies and they didn't shut them down and quarantine them, they'd actually converge to Germany and Netherlands and other countries. So this is just a great example of how people lie with data. It's a great example of how propaganda spreads, and it's a great example of how bad policy kills people. And the very same people who in the Soviet Union felt that they could centrally plan an economy and decide who gets food and who doesn't get food are now at it again, thinking that this time will be different. And I will remind everybody that during the 20th century, 100 million people starved to death in the Soviet Union, and tens of millions were gulagged. We will converge to that again in some form or capacity if we're not so careful with this quarantine virus. And the civil liberties that we lose, the rights we lose, the social graces that we lose as a consequence of this quarantine will not come back instantly the minute that the quarantines end. Politicians never give power back. Government never gives power back unless the people take it back from the government. And the media has been completely complicit in it. I am disgusted, absolutely disgusted with all of this. And I'm really tired of every single time that I speak out in this particular topic, I'm called racist, a Nazi, or I just want to get my hair cut, or I want to go get a beer or something like that to get through it. My life is great. I live on a 50-acre farm. I have no problems in the world. I could live in quarantine for 10 years and it'd have very little impact on me, my lifestyle, or the things going on. But I do see a lot more homeless people. I do know a lot of people have lost their livelihood, their business. New York City has gone from 20,000 restaurants to probably less than 10,000 after this is all said and done. The vast majority of those are small businesses owned by minorities, all of them completely wiped out. And no, it's not a solution to just institute universal basic income, socialize the entire medical system, and institute a welfare state. There's dignity in work, and there's dignity in freedom. And to rob us of this and then tell us that replacing it with total government control of the factors of production is the better way of going things, this is just the most inhuman of things I've seen. And we're making people suffer when the science clearly says we should not. So, yeah, I think it's going to have profound consequences, and it's already having consequences. It's hurting the entire world, and there's no scientific reason to hurt the entire world. I certainly do feel bad about the people who have died of coronavirus. Millions of people have died of malaria. Millions of people have died of other diseases as well. It's called being human. We're frail and fragile, and we can die from crazy things, from being hit by meteorite fragments to getting Ebola. It happens. And we as a collective society, we try to do better. We try to protect the vulnerable, but we do not use the fact that something can harm somebody as an excuse to rob people of their freedom and their liberty, and to rob people of their ability to self-govern and for society to function as it was. It's just morally wrong. Yeah, what's the solution then? Pretty simple. You just open up. You do what Sweden did. Use common sense. You socially distance. You wear masks. It reduces the infection rate. People are more careful. You accept that you're going to have a pretty constant stream of people getting it. There's some seasonality in this, as we've seen from India and Africa data. And you work on better therapeutics. Remdesivir is a great platform where you see that treating with zinc and vitamin D certainly helps. And we will have a vaccine for some strains of this, and we give that vaccine to the most vulnerable people. And then we move on with our lives, just like we moved on with our lives with influenza. Every year, influenza kills 500,000 people, if not more. And society works just fine. So yes, we have to accept we have another one here, and it may kill 1 million people every single year. It is a tragedy. And good research and good science and slight improvements here and there can make those numbers go down, but you get back to work. Destroying the world economy, all that's going to do is kill 10 times or 100 times as many people, but those people live in India, and those people live in Africa, and those people live in Southeast Asia. And apparently the media thinks it's okay to let them die because apparently they don't matter. Their skin color is not the right color, or they were just lost a geographic lottery, according to them. So let's ignore them. And meanwhile, they die in the most horrific ways possible. Violent deaths or deaths from hunger. That is not a good alternative, and it is fundamentally immoral, and we know it's coming. People are shouting it at the rooftops that when you destroy the world economy, this happens. It happened at the back of the world wars. It happened during the Great Depression. It's happened during every world crisis that has pushed global unemployment up. And this is no different, and it's being man-made. We're just doing it of our own volition, crying science, 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 when the science is faulty.